Hare Krishna, is my slide visible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we'll start with the Mangalacharan. Om Jnana Tivrandasya, Jnana Anjana Shalakaya, Chakshurunilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurue Namah, Sri Chaitanya Manu Vishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale, Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam, Vandeyam Sri Guru, Sri Yudapatakalam, Sri Guru Vaishnavamscha, Sri Rupam Sagrajadam Sagana Raghunathan Vitam Samsajivam, Sadvaitam Savadutam Parjana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam, Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Sri Vishaka Nitamcha, हे कृष्णा करुणा सिंधु दीनबंधु जगतपति गोपेशा गोपिका कांता राधा कांता नमस्ते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वंचाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिंधुभ्यो च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम राम हरे हरे ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय हरे कृष्णा. So today we'll continue with our Īśāvāsyam. Now we are in mantra number 17, the second last mantra out of 18. Mantra number 17. Vayuranilam amritam atedam Vasmantam Shariram Om Krato Smara Kritam Smara Krato Smara Kritam Smara. Let this temporary body be burned to ashes, and let the air of life be merged with the totality of air. Now, O my Lord, please remember all my sacrifices, and because you are the ultimate beneficiary, please remember all that I've done for you. So as we know, this Īśāvāsyam consisting of 18 mantras, this was recited by Swayambhu Manu to his grandson, Lord Yagya, who is actually an incarnation of Krishna. It is also mentioned in the 3rd chapter of Canto 1 of the Bhagavatam. So Yagya is actually the son of Akuti. Akuti is one of the 3 daughters of Swayambhu Manu. Then the Supreme Lord also appeared as Lord Kapila, another grandson of Swayambhu Manu, as the son of Devahuti. So these Īśāvāsyam mantras were recited by Swayambhu Manu to Lord Yagya. So in this mantra, it is a prayer to the Supreme Lord, like to make the Supreme Lord remember the kind of sacrifices that is done by the devotee at the time of the devotee's departure, or when the devotee is actually leaving his body. So the devotee is praying for the Supreme Lord to remember the kind of sacrifices done by the devotee. And also it has been mentioned here that because you are the ultimate beneficiary, so the prayer is meant specifically for the Supreme Lord, because he is the supreme beneficiary, the supreme enjoyer of all sacrifices. As mentioned in Gita 5.29, Krishna says, Bhoktaram Yajna Tapasam Sarvalokamayishwaram Suridam Sarvabhutanam Yatma Mam Shantim Richati. Bhoktaram Yajna Tapasam, Krishna says that he is the supreme enjoyer of all sacrifices. Though sacrifices are usually done to please certain demigods, the sacrifices are meant for certain demigods to get certain material benefits, but it is Krishna only who is the supreme enjoyer of all the sacrifices, and even the demigods get empowered by Krishna only to provide the material benefits through the demigod. So the kind of sacrifices done by a devotee, they are only, it is Krishna only who is the supreme enjoyer of whatever sacrifices done by devotees, and it is Krishna only who sanctions through the demigods for whatever material benefits we seek. But the truly enlightened devotees, as Krishna himself says in chapter 7 of the Gita, the jnanis, they would seek nothing but devotional service, and also to liberate themselves from this material bondage. So in the purport to this mantra, we'll be seeing a lot of references to the material body and how it is different from the soul, because the purport of this mantra is talking about how a devotee prays for the mercy of Krishna at the time of death, when the soul is leaving the material body. The temporary material body is certainly a foreign dress. The Bhagavad Gita 2.20 clearly says that after the destruction of the material body, the living entity is not annihilated, nor does he lose his identity. The identity of the living entity is never impersonal or formless. It is the material dress that is formless, and that takes a shape according to the form of the indestructible person. This mantra verifies that the living entity exists after the annihilation of the material body. So our true identity, as we shall see later, the most basic form of understanding or realization that we must have when it comes to self-realization is that we are not this material body, we are spirit souls. That is what self-realization is all about. We want to realize ourself. So the self actually refers to the spirit soul. So it is only possible by detaching from material denominations. So as mentioned here, the material body is a foreign dress because our original identity is that we are spirit souls. We don't have a material body. It is only due to our material desires that Krishna accommodates, not just us, he accommodates all the living entities who are actually his parts and parcels. So Krishna accommodates all the conditioned souls who have material desires to enjoy by occupying a certain material body with different types of senses. So it is only to facilitate those living entities who have material desires. However, even after death, the living entities who are actually jivas, the living entities who are actually spirit souls, they don't have birth or death. It is just that since we have this material bondage, so we are forced to take birth and also to undergo the process of death because of the transmigration of the soul. Whenever we take up a new material body, so that process is known as birth. So when we leave that body to take another material body, so that process is known as death. However, it is only the transmigration of the soul, and there is no birth or death for the soul itself. So that is also mentioned in Gita 2.20. The identity of the living entity is never impersonal or formless. As Krishna says in Gita 15.7, Mamai Vamso Jivaloke Jivabhuta Sanatana. Manasasthānindriyāni prakritisthāni karishati. We, as part and parcel of Krishna, we the jivas, we are part and parcel of, we are actually the Jiva Brahmans as part and parcel of the Param Brahma. So even our identity, it follows, it is qualitatively similar to that of the Supreme Brahman. As Krishna himself says in many verses in the Gita, like 7.24, 12.2, in those verses, Krishna clearly says that he is a person, and we have also seen how the Bhagavan realization is the topmost of all the different levels of realization of the absolute truth. So since the Supreme Brahman, from whom we ourselves get our identity from, we ourselves are part and parcel of the Supreme Brahman, and therefore we are also qualitatively similar to him. So the jivas are also not impersonal. The jivas also are individual souls who are eternally fragmented. As Krishna says in 15.7, the jivas are all eternally fragmented, meaning that it is not like the jivas were cut from the Supreme Brahman. So we have been eternally fragmented. So even before coming to this material world, we were eternally fragmented portions of the Supreme Brahman. And even after leaving this material world, even after going back to the spiritual world, we will still remain as eternal fragmental parts of the Supreme Brahman. It is the material dress that is formless and that takes a shape according to the form of the indestructible person. So the material dress is formless in the sense that it keeps changing throughout our life. So this is also mentioned in Gita 2.13 about how the material body keeps changing. So the material body is temporary and the spirit soul is eternal. There is no birth or death for the spirit soul. So the spirit soul continues to exist even after the so-called death of the material body. So the death which occurs is actually just a process through which the spirit soul leaves the material body. So to accommodate all the conditioned souls who have different material desires to enjoy, Krishna created 84 lakh species of material bodies. Prabhupada often calls these as apartments, the 84 lakh apartments. Jalajanava Lakshani, Stavaram Lakshavimshati, Krimio Rudra Sankhya, Pakshinam Dasalakshanam, Trimsa Lakshani Pasava, Chatur Lakshani Manusha. There are 9 lakh aquatics, 20 lakh plants and non-moving entities, 11 lakh germs and insects, 10 lakh bird species, 30 lakh quadrupeds or the 4-legged animals, 4 lakh human species. So that's how we get these 84 lakh species. So out of these 84 lakh, there are 4 lakh human species, and it is the human species which is regarded as the most elevated position, especially in this middle region of the universe. So we are now in the Bhumandal, in the middle part. As we know, there are also this upper planetary system and the lower planetary system, and we are in the middle, and being in the form of a human being in this middle planet is actually very auspicious, a very elevated position to engage in spiritual inquiry and devotional service. So the human form of life is also regarded as the most prestigious apartment. because we are occupying this human body for a specific period of time. It is like staying in a hotel or an apartment. After once our period of stay is over, then we have to quit this apartment. So it is best that we make use of this most prestigious apartment that we have attained in this life. So many characteristic features or the properties of the material body and also the spirit souls, they are discussed in chapter 2 itself, chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita, like in 2.13. Denosmin yata de kaumaram yavanam jara tata deyantra pratir dhiras tatra namuhyati. As the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. So this so-called process of birth and death is nothing but it refers to the transmigration of the soul. It is just that during the time of birth, the soul enters into a new body, it takes a new body, and at the time of death, it leaves from the current body to take another body. But even while being within the same body, the soul still sees many changes to that body which it occupies. So even our body, we had a different kind of our body was looking differently when we were young during our boyhood. Then it changed during youth. It will keep changing. So the material body itself is temporary in the sense that it keeps changing every moment. But the soul is eternal. It never changes. So that's why there is no birth or death for the spirit soul. But from such an elevated position, like the soul is eternal, but we have been like degraded now. Since we are conditioned souls, we are trapped or encaged in this kind of a degraded we are now in a very degraded place in the sense that our spirit soul, which was eternal, like more powerful, it is now encaged in a very vulnerable place, which is the material body. So this degradation happened due to our material desires. So the only way to escape from further degradation and also to regain our original elevated position, we have to get rid of all the material bondage. 2.16. Those who are seers of the truth have concluded that of the non-existent, the material body, there is no endurance. And of the eternal, the soul, there is no change. This they have concluded by studying the nature of both. So the material body has no endurance, so it keeps changing. The condition of it is like temporary, because even while we are being within the same body, even until the point of death, it keeps changing. So towards the end, especially when it nears the time of death, it becomes even more vulnerable. But the soul is always eternal, so it is actually immune to all these forms of vulnerability. But as mentioned earlier, our current position is that it is kind of degraded because our spirit soul is encaged in this degraded material body. That which pervades the entire body, you should know to be indestructible. No one is able to destroy that imperishable soul. So here, it is mentioned that which pervades the entire body. So it is referring to the spirit soul which pervades the entire body. So it is indestructible. The material body of the indestructible, immeasurable, and eternal living entity is sure to come to an end. Therefore, fight, O descendant of Bharata. So the material body is sure to come to an end, but it is totally the opposite with the soul. The spirit soul is eternal. It is indestructible, immeasurable. The material body is the exact opposite. It is destructible and it will come to an end for sure, whether we like it or not. So it is only due to delusion and bewilderment by Maya that we somehow refuse to believe that this material body is going to come to an end very soon, and therefore a lot of people tend to take it for granted. It's either they know and still they take it for granted, or they may not know at all, and therefore a lot of people are still thinking that they can wait until the time of retirement to read the first page of the Bhagavad Gita. Neither he who thinks the living entity, the slayer, nor he who thinks it is slain is in knowledge, for the self slays nor is slain. So again, it is talking about here Krishna is referring to the properties of the spirit soul. So the spirit soul never dies, it is eternal, and therefore no one could slay the spirit soul. 2.20, this verse was referred to in the purport we saw earlier, the early part of the purport. Na jayate mriyate va kadashin, na yam bhutva bhavitava na bhuyaha, ajo nitya shashvatayam purano, na hanyate hanyamane sharire. For the soul dies neither birth nor death at any time. Na jayate mriyate. He has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. Na yam bhutva bhavitava na bhuyaha, ajo nitya shashvatayam purano. He is unborn, eternal, ever existing, and primeval. He is not slain when the body is slain. So these are the properties of the spirit soul, and they are exactly the opposite to the properties of the material body. So we can clearly see that the spirit soul is always superior to the material body simply by looking at the properties of the material body and the spirit soul. So the spirit soul is eternal, it is indestructible, ever existing. It is never slain. So our original identity is that we are eternal and we don't have birth and we don't have death. That is our original position as spirit souls. But only due to our material desires, we are now encased in this material body, and it is a much more degraded position. And this happened due to our own foolishness, because we ourselves, we are the ones who wanted to be enjoyers and controllers. So we forgot our original constitutional position as the eternal servants of Krishna, and instead we actually wanted to enjoy according to our material desires. And therefore Krishna only wants to facilitate all the living entities who have material desires with the 84 lakh apartments. But it is only due to our foolishness that we are now encased in this material body, which is clearly inferior to the eternal spirit soul. Asamsi jirnani yata vyaya navani grinati naroparani tata sharirani vyaya jirnani anyani samyati navani dehi. As a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones. So this is referring to, again, the transmigration of the soul, about how the spirit soul takes up new material bodies and at the same time it gives up the old one. So it refers to the process of birth and death. So the process of birth and death are actually, they are like material designations related to the material nature. Otherwise, there's no birth or death for the spirit soul. And we can see that we are trapped in this incessant cycle of birth, death, old age and disease, janma mrityu jara vyadhi, and we are facing all sorts of problems due to our material desires. As long as we don't get rid of our material bondage, we will continue to, our spirit soul will continue to transmigrate and keep taking newer material bodies, and the cycle keeps continuing. The moment the spirit soul takes a new body, so that is known as birth, and the time when the spirit soul leaves that dilapidated apartment or material body, so that is the time of death. But even in between, the time in between where the time in between when the spirit soul occupies that material body, so during that time still the spirit soul has to undergo the problems of old age and disease. Because from the time when we are born, meaning from the time when the spirit soul takes a new body, from that time onwards, the aging process starts. Ironically, every year, we tend to be very, we are all happily celebrating our birthday. Whether it is to celebrate our process of nearing death or what. So ironically, it's still happening. So from the day we are born, we keep aging, and apart from the process of aging, we also have the various diseases. We also suffer from diseases. So from the time of birth until the time of death, we are facing all these problems continuously, and it is only due to our foolishness that we have invited all these troubles. Otherwise, in our original identity with our transcendental body, just like which is qualitatively similar to Krishna, we would be immune to these problems of janma mrityu jara vyadhi. Nainam chindati sastrani, nainam dati pavaka, na chainam kledayanti apo, na shoshayati marutaha. The soul can never be cut to pieces by any weapon, nor burned by fire, nor moistened by water, nor withered by the wind. So again, it is also, this verse is also referring to the superior qualities of the spirit soul. Apart from verse 15.7, there are also several verses from chapter 7 of the Gita. The spirit souls are part of Krishna's superior spiritual energy, and therefore the soul has these superior qualities, like it can never be cut to pieces by any weapon, nor burned by fire, nor moistened by water, nor withered by the wind. But all these vulnerabilities are there with the material body. It is only the material body which suffers due to all these vulnerabilities. Otherwise, the spirit soul cannot be touched. Another important significance of this verse is that it clearly demolishes the so-called merging into the so-called merging process with the Supreme by other schools of thought. because what those schools of thought talk about is that they say that we became particles away from the Supreme Lord, from the Supreme Brahman, and then they say that after that, after liberation, we are going to merge back. But that notion is clearly in contradiction with what Krishna says in this verse and also in verse 15.7. In 15.7, Krishna clearly says that all the living entities, all the jivas are eternal fragmental parts of Krishna. And also in this verse, it is clearly stated that the soul can never be cut to pieces. So Krishna clearly says in 15.7 that the souls, the jivas are eternally fragmented. And that is also, that verse also it is also related to this verse in the sense that Krishna himself says the spirit soul is eternally fragmented. So there was never a time when that cutting process happened, and there's not going to be any merging process which happens after liberation. So we were eternally fragmented, and we will remain to be eternally fragmented even after liberation. So just like the Supreme Personality of Godhead, even after liberation, we are going to remain as individual spirit souls and we'll have our personal interaction, our personal relationship with the Supreme Lord. So these so-called notions of being separated and merging back into the Supreme Lord, those are clearly demolished by this verse and also verse 15.7, spoken by Krishna himself. 2.24, this individual soul is unbreakable and insoluble and can be neither burn nor dry. He is everlasting, present everywhere, unchangeable, immovable, and eternally the same. Again, this verse also demolishes the notion of merging with the Supreme after death, because there was never a time when we were like united completely with the Supreme. As Krishna himself says, we were eternally fragmented and we will continue to be eternally fragmented. It is said that the soul is invisible, inconceivable, and immutable. Knowing this, you should not grieve for the body. So again, in all these verses, we can clearly see the contrast in the properties of the material body and the soul. So only by knowing these intricacies of the material body and the soul, we can truly realize our true position as spirit souls. Otherwise, due to Maya, we'll always be running behind so many material designations. But that madness will only further entangle us in more material entanglement. So we should be doing the exact opposite. We should enlighten ourselves about the nature of the spirit soul to truly understand our original identity. Only that would enable us to liberate ourselves from this material bondage. Continuation of the purport for mantra 17. Material nature displays wonderful workmanship by creating varieties of bodies for the living beings according to their propensities for sense gratification. So the 84 lakh material bodies, they all have very different properties. They are like different apartments meant for different kind of enjoyment or sense gratification. The living entity who wants to taste stool is given the body of a hog. One who wants to eat the flesh and blood of other animals may be given a tiger's body equipped with suitable teeth and claws. Human teeth are so made that they can chew and cut fruit and vegetables. So this human form of life is ideal for simple living, to eat fruits and vegetables for simple living and high thinking. However, those who enjoy eating so much meat, and especially for those who proudly proclaim that they are pure non-vegetarians, so they will be provided that kind of apartments or that type of bodies, so that they can continue with their sense gratification. Because clearly, if such people don't understand the value of this precious human form of life, this prestigious apartment, then they only deserve much more degraded apartments. 8.5 Antakale च मामेवा स्मरण मुक्त्वा कलेवरम यः प्रयाति समद्भावम याति नास्ति अत्र संशयः. And whoever at the end of his life quits his body remembering me alone at once attains my nature. Of this there is no doubt. So this verse is another very important verse from the Gita, in which Krishna is guaranteeing that those who remember him at the time of death will attain liberation. However, merely relying on this one verse alone is not very wise, because in many other verses, Krishna keeps reiterating the importance of being absorbed in his thoughts. Krishna actually emphasizes the importance of practicing Krishna consciousness so that we will be able to remember him at the time of death. We can only remember Krishna at the time of death if we practice Krishna consciousness throughout our life. So this has also been mentioned by Krishna in many other verses like 9.34 and 18.65. So Krishna keeps saying that we should keep remembering him so that we can attain this state, especially at the time of death. So it is not very wise if people tend to think that, okay, since Krishna has spoken verse 8.5, so I'll indulge in all sorts of nonsense, then I'll just think of Krishna at the time of death. No, we cannot fool Krishna like that, because him being the Chaitya Guru, as the super soul in our heart, he knows everything that's going on within our heart. So even if we try to fool him like that, then he knows what to do. So that's why Krishna reiterated in many other verses the importance of remembering him always, so that we can attain this state towards the end of our life. Yam yamapi swaram bhavam tyajate ante kalevaram tam tameveti kaunteya sada tad bhava bhavita. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, O son of Kunti, that state he will attain without fail. So for those who proudly proclaim that they are pure non-vegetarians, so they can, it's perfectly fine. They can relish their favorite non-vegetarian food even at the time of death. So they'll be getting that type of apartments or that type of bodies with specific types of senses, which will further enable them to enjoy more meat eating. Tasmat sarvesu kaleshu mamanusmanayudhyacha mai arpita manobuddhir mamevishichi asamshaya. Therefore, Arjuna, you should always think of me in the form of Krishna, and at the same time carry out your prescribed duty of fighting. With your activities dedicated to me and your mind and intelligence fixed on me, you will attain me without doubt. So, though Krishna said that those who remember him at the time of death will attain him in 8.5, in this verse, Krishna is saying that we should always think of him. We should always think of Krishna by practicing Krishna consciousness throughout our life, so that we can attain that state of being able to remember Krishna at the time of death. Only if we remember Krishna by practicing Krishna consciousness throughout our life, only then we will be able to remember Krishna at the time of death, especially at the time when we are experiencing so much pain. If I'm not mistaken, in Garuda Purana, it has been mentioned that at the time of death, we will be experiencing a kind of pain which is equivalent to being stung by hundreds or thousands of scorpions. So at that type of in that type of situation, we can only remember Krishna if we have the mercy of Krishna. So it is completely foolish if we tend to think that we can indulge in any sort of nonsense and just try to think of Krishna at the time of death. No, Krishna himself is saying that we should always think of him throughout our life so that we can attain that state when we will be able to remember him at the time of death. 8.8 Abhyasayuktena Chetasa Nanyagamina Paramam Purusham Divyam Yanti Patanu Chintayan. He who meditates on me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his mind constantly engaged in remembering me. Undeviated from the path, he, O Partha, is sure to reach me. So again, we can only remember Krishna at the time of death if we are engaged in Abhyasa, the practice of Krishna consciousness, that is Abhyasa. So that Abhyasa is required to constantly remember Krishna during our lifetime so that we can keep remembering him even at the time of death. So these 4 verses should always be read together. It is not very wise to simply read 8.5 in isolation. 15.8 Shariram yad apnoti yachapi uttamati swaha Ridvaitani samyati vayurgandani vasyat. The living entity in the material world carries his different conceptions of life from one body to another, as the air carries aromas. Thus, he takes one kind of body and again quits it to take another. We have been gifted with this human form of life because we have done certain activities in our past life which were auspicious enough, and it made us qualified to get this precious human form of life. So if we only if we continue our pious acts, then even if our practice is not complete, we will be gifted with another human form of life to complete our practice. Otherwise, we'll only be getting with our materially contaminated consciousness, we'll only be getting more degraded material body, which may not be useful at all to practice Krishna consciousness. Stotram chakshus prasanam cha rasanam grahanam cha adhishtaya manaschayam vishan upaseyate. The living entity, thus taking another gross body, obtains a certain type of ear, eye, tongue, nose, and sense of touch, which are grouped about the mind. He thus enjoys a particular set of sense objects. So the 84 lakh material bodies, they have specific types of senses which enable them to enjoy in different ways by enjoying different sense objects. So those who don't understand the importance of this human form of life, but they proudly proclaim to be pure non-vegetarian, so such people will be getting very specific sense of set of senses that will enable them to enjoy that type of sense objects. So if they take it for granted, then for sure they are not qualified to get this precious human form of life again. Utnavatam stham vapi gunjanava gunanitam vimudananu pasyanti jnana chakshusha. The foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. But one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all this. So as mentioned earlier, the very first step in self-realization is to understand the self. If we want to realize the self, we must know what is the self. The self is the spirit soul. Only when we know that we are spirit souls, we are not this material body, only then we can see them as two different entities, and only then we will be able to understand the intricacies of the different properties of the material body and the spirit soul. So once we truly understand the superior nature of the spirit soul, then we won't be running behind so many material designations. We will be more clear about what should be our resolve, about why we should get rid of all material bondage and focus on regaining our original constitutional position in the spiritual world. So that is possible only for those whose eyes are trained in knowledge. Only with knowledge we can fight the spell of the modes of nature. And knowledge here, it specifically refers to spiritual knowledge. Spiritual knowledge should be the culmination of all other types of knowledge. Whatever knowledge that we get from educational institutions, those type of knowledge, they only train us how to be better than animals in the business of eating, sleeping, mating, defending. So that type of education will only further entangle us in the material bondage. We can only liberate ourselves as spirit souls. We can only liberate ourselves from the material entanglement through spiritual knowledge. And that spiritual knowledge can only be obtained from a bona fide parampara. Yatanto yoginischainam pashyanti atmanavastam yatanto api ektatmano nainam pashyanti achetasa. The endeavoring transcendentalists who are situated in self-realization can see all this clearly. But those whose minds are not developed and who are not situated in self-realization cannot see what is taking place, though they may try. So this human form of life is the best opportunity for self-realization. It is the best apartment out of the 84 lakh. So if we miss this opportunity, we may not get it again, especially if we take it for granted and we don't even endeavor at all. We are after designations, material designations. So whatever material designations that we have now will all become completely useless the moment we leave this material body. But we are not these bodies, and realizing this is the first stage in spiritual realization. So spiritual realization or self-realization requires that we realize the self. The self is the spirit soul. We must first realize that we are not this material body, we are spirit souls. And the further more advanced realization is that we are part and parcel of the Supreme Lord and we are eternal servants of Krishna. If we are not attached to devotional service to the Lord, then we cannot become detached from the modes of material nature. As long as we don't give up this propensity of lording it over material nature, there's no possibility of returning to the kingdom of the Supreme, the Sanatana Dhamma. So, as long as we are bewildered by Maya, Maya will always continue to pull us towards itself, but the onus is on us to fight and detach from Maya through devotional service. Otherwise, we are only going to be trapped in this cycle forever. So if we really want to be detached from Maya, we have to increase our devotional service. Otherwise, the more we disregard devotional service, the more Maya will take over, and we can never escape from this material entanglement. We are only going to keep suffering from the problems of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi in many of the 84 lakh material bodies. So even now we can clearly see how the cats and dogs are struggling so much. So if we take this precious human form of life for granted, then for sure we may not even be qualified to get the body of a cat or even a dog in the next life. Because when we have been given such a wonderful opportunity, and if we completely disregard it, so that will only further that will only eliminate whatever possibility that we may have in future to regain this human form of life. Even in chapter 6 of the Gita, towards the end, Krishna says that those who endeavor, and even if they don't complete their practice of Krishna consciousness, they can still get the human form of life once they quit the present body. But for those who do not endeavor at all, but those who are completely in Maya, so they will only be further, they will only attain more degraded types of material bodies, which will never permit them to engage in Krishna consciousness. Material bodies of all animals and man are foreign to the living entity. So the living entity, that is the spirit soul, they change according to the living entity's desire for sense gratification. So all the 84 lakh material bodies, they are meant to accommodate. Krishna wants to accommodate the conditioned souls by providing them with all these 84 lakh material bodies with different types of senses to enjoy in different ways. However, since we have attained this precious human form of life, we must understand that we are not meant to be in this material world, and it is important to regain our original position by quitting this material body. Then we can regain our original transcendental body. The highest developed form is this human form when it is possessed of a full sense of spiritual knowledge. Only the human form of life enables the living entity to engage in spiritual inquiry and devotional service. So for those who continue to live like animals, those who continue to live like cats and dogs, even after getting the human body, so such people won't be qualified to get this human body again. So the highest perfection in life, meaning we attain the biggest success of our human form of life when we utilize this human body to engage in spiritual inquiry and devotional service, to quit this material body, to elevate, to liberate ourselves from this material entanglement fully. Then we can regain our transcendental body and continue our association with the Supreme Lord in the spiritual world. So that transcendental spiritual body is the exact opposite of this material body, which is vulnerable to the problems of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi. That transcendental body never undergoes the problems of birth, death, old age, and disease. Material nature forces the living entity to change his body due to his different desires for sense gratification. So those who continue to live with the desires like animals, even after getting the human body, so they will be getting the body of an animal according to the desires. So that completely defeats the purpose of this human form of life. This life should be fully utilized for our self-realization and to completely liberate ourselves from this material bondage. But if we continue to live like animals, even after getting this human body, then we won't be qualified to get this precious human form of life again. The spiritual spark, which is part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, is the same, whether he is in a body of a hog or in the body of a demigod. So Krishna sees all of us as spirit souls, as his parts and parcels. He does not discriminate according to the material designations. It is only us, due to the influence of Maya. By default, we always tend to discriminate according to the material designations, because our tendency is always there to distinguish based on the material bodies. However, for those who truly realize that all living entities are spirit souls, they'll be able to see that the spirit soul is the same, though they are encased in different types of bodies. The living entity takes on different bodies according to his pious and vicious activities. The human body is highly developed and has full consciousness, which is ideal for practicing Krishna consciousness. So in 5.18, Krishna says, Vidyavanaya Sampanne, Brahmane Gavihastini, Suni Chaiva, Swapakecha, Pandita Samadarshanaha. The humble sages, by virtue of true knowledge, see with equal vision. A learned and gentle Brahmana, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a dog eater. So such enlightened souls, they are able to see, by virtue of true knowledge, they are able to see that the spirit soul, which is there in all these different bodies, is the same. 13.28, Samam Sarveshu Bhuteshu Tishtantam Parameshwaram Vinashatyu Avinashantam Ya Pashyati Sa Pashyati. One who sees the super soul accompanying the individual soul in all bodies, and who understands that neither the soul nor the super soul within the destructible body is ever destroyed, actually sees. So we can only understand the intricacies of the soul, and at a much more advanced level, the super soul, only if we have the knowledge of self-realization. By default, we are not able to understand this knowledge due to the influence of Maya. That's why the mercy of the spiritual master and also the bona fide parampara is important to enable us to understand these transcendental topics. The transcendental qualities are conducive to liberation, whereas the demoniac qualities make for bondage. Do not worry, O son of Pandu, for you are born with the divine qualities. This is from chapter 16, the chapter on divine and demoniac qualities. Apart from this chapter, Krishna also speaks about those who surrender to him and also those who don't surrender to him. So some people might be wondering, so why is it that Krishna classifies people according to these divine and demoniac qualities? So it is not like Krishna is putting people into the different categories. It is us. We are the ones who develop such qualities. So if we develop divine qualities by following the instructions of Krishna, then we will be qualified for liberation. Otherwise, we will be further entangled in the material bondage. So we are the ones who develop these qualities. It is not like Krishna simply wants to put us in different categories. He sees all the jivas as the same, as his eternal fragmental parts. Those who are envious and mischievous, who are the lowest among men, are perpetually cast into the ocean of material existence, into various demoniac species of life. Now, this doesn't mean that Krishna simply wants to create problems for the living entities. It is just that those who develop the demoniac qualities will be put into such degraded apartments, because they are the ones who develop such qualities. Like for those who have got the prestigious apartment, the human form of life, if they don't fully utilize the human form of life for spiritual inquiry and devotional service, then they only deserve the much more degraded demoniac species of life. So even when they are given the human body, if they continue to live like animals, might as well let them live in the body of animals. So Krishna only facilitates according to the material desires of the different living entities. Attaining repeated birth amongst the species of demoniac life, O son of Kunti, such persons can never approach me. Gradually, they sink down to the most abominable type of existence. So Krishna always facilitates those who have material desires. Even in the topics when where we saw about the three worlds in the lower planetary systems, they are actually much more materially opulent, even compared to the upper planetary systems. However, the residents of the lower planetary systems, though they enjoy such material opulence, they are not in an ideal position to realize about Krishna consciousness. So Krishna facilitates even the residents of the lower planetary systems by giving them the facilities to enjoy according to their material desires. However, when in such degraded conditions, they get more distanced from the possibility of being enlightened about God consciousness. According to Gita 7.19, the most perfect man surrenders unto the Lord after many, many lifetimes of culturing knowledge. That culture of knowledge reaches perfection only when the knower comes to the point of surrendering unto the Supreme Lord, Vasudeva. Otherwise, one has to fall down again to the material atmosphere. Indeed, one must fall down even if he has become one with the Brahma Jyoti. 7.19 Bhaunam Janmanamante Jnanan Mam Prapajyate Vasudeva Sarvamiti Sa Mahatma Sudurlabha. After many births and deaths, he who is actually in knowledge surrenders unto me, knowing me to be the cause of all causes and all that is. Such a great soul is very rare. Even in this verse, Krishna is directly referring to himself, meaning the Bhagavan realization, the topmost level of realization of the absolute truth. So only the one who knows Bhagavan as the cause of all causes, only that person is a Mahatma, unlike the manufactured Mahatmas who have said that Krishna is an imagination. So such people are not Mahatmas. The Mahatma is the one who has the Bhagavan realization, knowing Bhagavan Krishna to be the cause of all causes. The living entities want to enjoy their senses, and therefore they are placed in the material world to become false lords under the dictation of the senses. The desire for lordship is the material disease of the living being, for under the spell of sense enjoyment, he transmigrates through the various bodies manifested in the material world. Becoming one with the Brahmajyoti does not represent mature knowledge. Only by surrendering unto the Lord completely and developing one's sense of spiritual service does one reach the highest perfectional stage. So first of all, the conditioned souls are suffering due to the material disease of wanting to be false enjoyers. We, as part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, we can never be enjoyers. We are not meant to be enjoyers. We are meant to be eternal servants of the Supreme Lord. So our desire to be false enjoyers, that is our main material disease. But even when we gain some realization, and even if we try to gain knowledge about the Supreme Lord, that knowledge will only be complete with the topmost realization of Bhagavan realization, not the impersonal Brahman realization. So that Bhagavan realization can be attained through Bhakti Yoga by practicing devotional service. and impersonal Brahman realization does not represent mature knowledge. So even for those who endeavor to overcome their material disease, if they merely stop at the basic level of impersonal Brahman realization, still that is not enough. We have to attain the topmost Bhagavan realization. The living entity prays to enter the spiritual kingdom of God after relinquishing his material body and material air. So this is the prayer in this mantra, mantra 17. The devotee prays to the Lord to remember his activities and the sacrifices he has performed. So the kind of devotional service that the devotee has performed is prayer at the time of death with full consciousness of his past deeds and of the ultimate goal. One who is completely under the rule of material nature remembers the heinous activities he performed during the existence of his material body, and consequently he gets another material body after death, as confirmed in 8.6. So whatever activities we perform in our present life, that will influence our consciousness in this life, and that is likely to be maintained until the time of death. So when we leave the body with such materially contaminated consciousness, we'll be only getting a further more degraded form of material body. The mind remains surcharged with material desires, and consequently he cannot enter into the spiritual kingdom with a spiritual body. So this is for those who do not practice devotional service. The devotees, however, develop a sense of love for Godhead by practicing devotional service to the Lord. Krishna describes his intimate relationship with his devotees, especially in Gita 9.30 to 9.34. So even in these verses, Krishna explains about how he also helps the devotees. So even if there's an accidental fall down, so still Krishna helps that devotee to continue his devotional service. Then in 9.32, Krishna says, those who take shelter in me, regardless of their material designations, regardless of whether it's a woman, Vaishya or Shudra, they can attain the supreme destination. So Krishna does not see the material designations. He only sees our bhakti. Therefore, engage in loving service unto me. Being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. In 9.34, Krishna says, always think of me, become my devotee, offer obeisances to me and worship me. Being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. So similar to what Krishna said in 8.7, Krishna reiterates the importance of always thinking about him and always remembering him in 9.34. And also in 18.65, Krishna reiterates the same thing about how important it is to always remember him. Only if we always remember him, we'll be able to remember him at the time of death. So as mentioned earlier, Krishna being the super soul, Upadrashta Anuvanta cha Bhalta Bhokta Maheshwara Paramatmeti Chapyukta Deismin Purusha Paraha. Yet in this body there is another, a transcendental enjoyer who is the Lord, the supreme proprietor, who exists as the overseer and permitter, and who is known as the super soul. So Krishna is the overseer and permitter. For those who are thinking that they can indulge in all sorts of nonsense and just think of Krishna at the time of death. So Krishna being the overseer and permitter, he knows what to do with such people who are trying to fool him. A conditioned soul has to act for double functions, maintenance of the body and for self-realization. The self-realization part of one's activities is executed in one's occupation as a devotee of the Lord, and one performs actions in that connection also. One must perform these two different functions along parallel lines. So even for those who are engaged in devotional service, it doesn't mean that we can fully neglect our material duties. we still need to maintain ourselves through our material duties, but with Krishna consciousness, we can still remember Krishna while being engaged in our material duties, and that is also a form of bhakti. So the more we are engaged in that way, slowly we can reduce our material attachment. So the more we detach ourselves from the material designations and material needs, our taste for increasing our devotional service, it also keeps increasing. The more we detach from the material designations, the taste for more devotional service increases. As long as the proportion of devotional service does not come to the right point, there is a chance for an occasional exhibition of worldliness. By the grace of the Lord, such imperfections will come to an end very shortly. So, even though our devotional service, our journey may not be perfect, still, as long as we endeavor, the Lord will also help us in our efforts. The facilities of devotional service are denied to the impersonalists because they are attached to the Brahmajyoti feature of the Lord. They cannot penetrate the Brahmajyoti because they don't believe in the personality of Godhead. The impersonalists who think about the Brahmajyoti being the end goal, they cannot see the Supreme Lord, who himself is the source of the Brahmajyoti. And therefore, they cannot attain the elevated status of which is meant for devotees. Consequently, the impersonalists pursue a fruitless labor as confirmed in Gita 12.5. Krishna clearly says in 12.5, Klesho adhikataras tesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta hi gati dukkam deyavabhir avapate. In 12.2 itself, Krishna clearly says that it is best to worship the personal form of Krishna. And starting from 12.3 to 12.5, Krishna gives the explanation. In 12.5, Krishna says, for those whose minds are attached to the unmanifested, impersonal feature of the Supreme, advancement is very troublesome. To make progress in that discipline is always difficult for those who are embodied. So in our present condition, where we are embodied souls, it is not easy for us to always meditate on the unmanifested. And therefore, Krishna himself is prescribing this best method to worship his personal form, because the personal form is the ultimate, the highest form which enables us to attain the topmost level of Bhagavan realization. So it has been recommended by Krishna himself. Krishna himself is making it clear about what we should do. So there's no need to take the path of the impersonalist, which only adds to our miseries. Devotional service to the Lord consists essentially of 9 transcendental activities. So these 9 activities are there mentioned in 7.5.23 of Bhagavatam. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atmaniyadam. However, by adopting only one of these 9 principles, the following renowned devotees were able to achieve the highest perfection. By hearing of the Lord, Maharaj Parikshit attained the result. So though there are 9 types of devotional activities, it doesn't mean that we have to do all 9, because they are different, and we may not always be able to be engaged in all 9 types of activities, especially when it comes to Archanam, Vandanam. So such activities, they require a lot of paraphernalia. So when we don't have too many facilities, so we can simply engage in hearing and chanting, Shravanam, Kirtanam. Merely by being engaged in hearing and chanting, we can automatically remember. So even the process of reading the scriptures is also like similar to hearing. So reading the scriptures is like hearing through the eyes, Shravanam through the eyes. So merely by increasing our Shravanam Kirtanam, so we can also improve our Smaranam. So merely by engaging in these simple processes out of the 9, we can still attain perfection. All the mantras of the Vedic hymns is summarized in Vedanta Sutra and properly explained in Srimad Bhagavatam. Srimad Bhagavatam is the mature fruit of the Vedic tree of wisdom. Hearing and chanting of the signs of God is the basic principle of devotional life. So the processes are not too difficult. Even Sutta Goswami, he himself heard the Srimad Bhagavatam when Shukadeva Goswami was speaking to Maharaj Parikshit, and therefore he was able to deliver. He was able to do Kirtanam. After being engaged in Shravanam, he was able to do Kirtanam to the sages of Naimisharanya. Maharaj Parikshit's main question was, what is the duty of every man, specifically at the time of death? Shukadeva Goswami answered, the person should always hear about, glorify, and remember the personality of Godhead. Again, it is about Shravanam, Kirtanam, Smaranam. These activities, these simple activities can easily help us to attain perfection in our devotional service. So-called human society is generally engaged at night in sleeping and having sex, during the daytime in earning as much money as possible. So the so-called human society is merely engaged in the business of eating, sleeping, mating, defending, just like animals, without God consciousness. People have very little time to talk about the personality of Godhead or to inquire about Him. One should therefore not indulge in hearing and speaking of the rubbish activities, but one should mold his life in such a way that he can engage in godly activities without wasting a second. This is especially very important for us, the Kali Jivas, because as mentioned in 1.1.10 of Bhagavatam, all the Kali Jivas have short lives. And also in 7.6.7 of the Bhagavatam, there's this explanation about how even if we live up to 100 years, it is not enough to be engaged in enough amount of devotional service, because out of the 100 years, that is, if we live up to 100 years, we only get 30 years for devotional service, a maximum, because during the first 20 years, we are too immature to understand the transcendental topics. During old age, we may not be able to do many services. So in the 60 years in the middle, half the time is spent for sleeping and leisure activities. So we only have about 30 years for strictly for devotional service. And that is only if we live up to 100 years. However, it has also been mentioned in the 12th canto that the maximum duration of life for human beings in Kali Yuga will become 50 years. So the Kali Jivas already have very short lives, but it will keep getting shorter as Kali advances. So all these further prove the importance of why we should not waste our time on mundane topics. So we can always get the most out of our time by being engaged in Shravanam, Kirtanam, and Smaranam. Prahlad Maharaj also said that this human form of life is most rarely achieved. Though it is temporary and very short, we can make it meaningful through devotional service, because apart from, though there are many imperfections with this human form of life, especially in this Kali Yuga, we can still utilize this human form of life through devotional service to attain the highest goal. Unless one is accustomed to devotional practice, what will he remember at the time of death? How can he pray to the Almighty Lord to remember his sacrifices? So those who think that they can indulge in all sorts of nonsense and simply remember Krishna at the time of death. So such people cannot remind Krishna about the kind of sacrifices which they have done during their lifetime, because they have none. So that is why we must continue our practice of Krishna consciousness throughout our lifetime, so that we can remember Krishna at the time of death. And also pray to Krishna to remember our sacrifices, as mentioned in this mantra. Only if we perform devotional service, only then we can plead to Krishna to remember our services. So that's all for today. Thank you for attending. Any questions or comments? Okay, so we'll